a name carved into stone, stamped into tiles, pressed into the very bones of the Roman Empire. Then, it stops. No final battle described. No burial ground discovered. No official explanation recorded. Just silence. By the early 2nd century, one of Rome's most experienced legions vanishes from history, not in myth, not in legend, but in the empire's own records. Legio IX Hispana. A force that marched, fought, and built across the Roman world, and then, without warning, slipped beyond the edge of what we can prove. Did they fall in Britain, swallowed by tribal war at the empire's northern edge? Or were they sent far away, eastward, into deserts where Rome later chose not to remember? And if they were destroyed, what happened to what they carried? The weapons issued to thousands of soldiers, the paid chests of imperial silver, the sacred standards, symbols Rome never abandoned willingly. An entire legion does not simply disappear empty-handed. So this is not just a story about missing men. It's about missing weight, missing iron, missing wealth, and a question Rome never answered. What really happened to the 9th Legion, and what vanished with them? Long before it vanished, the 9th Legion was known for something else entirely: reliability. It was formed during the turbulent final years of the Roman Republic, a time when legions were not ceremonial symbols, but instruments of survival. This was an army built for hard ground and harder wars. The 9th fought first in Gaul, then in Hispania, where it earned the name Hispana, not as an honorific, but as a mark of endurance. These were not quick victories. They were grinding campaigns. Ambushes, mountain passes, relentless resistance. The legion learned how to move through hostile territory, how to build roads where none existed, how to hold ground that did not want to be held. And Rome noticed. Over time, the 9th became a tool Rome trusted with expansion, the kind of unit sent not where things were stable, but where they were not. When the empire pushed north into Britain, it was legions like this that went first. Men trained to fight far from Rome, to build forts before cities, to impose order where Rome's laws had never reached. The 9th left marks everywhere it went. Tiles stamped with its insignia, stone inscriptions nomming its officers, weapons standardized, numbered, accounted for. This was a legion that existed on paper as much as it did on the battlefield. Which is what makes what comes next so disturbing. Because organizations like this don't simply fade. They don't drift into obscurity. They are recorded, tracked, replaced. And yet, at some point after its greatest years, the 9th Legion, a unit woven into the machinery of empire, stops appearing. No discharge record. No official destruction notice. No successor announced. Just absence. So the question is whether the 9th mattered. It's this: how does a legion carved into Rome's own records vanish, without leaving a final line behind? For historians, mysteries don't begin with legends. They begin with dates. And for the 9th Legion, one date matters more than any other. Around AD 107 to 108, in the city the Romans called Eboracum, modern York, the 9th leaves its last certain fingerprint in Britain. An inscription. Clean, formal, undramatic. It names officers. It marks construction. It does what Roman records always do. It confirms presence. And then nothing follows. No later inscriptions. No updated dedications. No official farewell. Archaeologists trace the legion the way one follows footprints in wet ground. Stamped tiles from fortresses. Fragments of stone nomming the ninth at Aldborough. Administrative traces near Carlisle, guarding the northern frontier. Each piece fits. Each confirms the same thing. The ninth was here. Active, organized, accounted for. Until suddenly, it is. After AD 108, the trail does not weaken. It ends. No evidence of a withdrawal ceremony. No announcement of destruction. No record of reassignment within Britain. Other legions continue to appear in documents. Governors chain. Fortresses are repaired. But the ninth does not return to the page. And this absence matters. Because Rome was obsessive about records. Units were disbanded on paper. Losses were counted. Failures were buried in bureaucracy, but still buried somewhere. Yet here, the empire's administrative voice goes quiet. So the question sharpens. Did something catastrophic happen so quickly that no report survived? Or did the ninth leave Britain entirely and vanish somewhere Rome stopped looking? Because this is the last moment when we can say, without doubt, the ninth legion exists. Everything after this point is uncertainty. York, Aldborough, Carlisle. 3 places. 1 legion. A consistent presence until the pattern collapses. After this moment, no stone speaks its name in Britain again. No enemy claims the victory. No Roman historian records the defeat. No official voice explains the loss. What remains is a gap, so complete it forces a choice. Either the Ninth Legion was destroyed so thoroughly that nothing recognizable survived, or Rome, faced with something it could not easily explain, chose silence instead. When a trail ends this completely, historians do what investigators always do. They widen the search. Not north, not deeper into Britain, but across the sea. On the European continent, along the Rhine frontier, archaeologists uncover something unexpected. At Nijmegen, in the modern Netherlands, fragments emerge from the soil, tiles stamped with familiar markings, altars bearing partial names, coins circulating in the early 2nd century. And among them, a designation that should not be here. Legio IX. The dates matter. These finds point to activity around AD 120, more than a decade after the Ninth vanished from Britain's records. If correct, it means one thing. The Legion was not destroyed in Britain, or at least not entirely. But the evidence refuses to stay simple. The inscriptions do not describe a full legion on campaign. They do not list the usual hierarchy. They lack the administrative weight Rome normally leaves behind. Instead, they hint at something smaller. A vexillatio. A detachment. A fragment of a legion sent ahead, reassigned, or broken off for a specific task. Roman legions did this often. Detachments built roads, guarded borders, reinforced unstable regions, which raises a dangerous possibility. What if what we're seeing in Nijmegen is not survival, but residue? A handful of men carrying the name of a legion that no longer fully exists. Or worse, the last administrative echo of a unit already broken elsewhere. If the Ninth marched east, why is there no clear record of the transfer? If only a detachment arrived, where was the rest of the legion? And if this is merely a fragment, what happened to the whole? Because a vexillation does not disappear a legion, it implies the legion was already in trouble, already divided, already changing. So the mystery deepens. Did the Ninth Legion leave Britain intact and redeploy to the continent? Or are these stones in Nijmegen the last scattered fingerprints of a force that had already begun to come apart? And if this is only a fragment, what fate required Rome to break a legion apart in the first place? At this point, the mystery of the Ninth Legion demands discipline. Not speculation. Not legend. Evidence. First, what we know. Stamped tiles in York confirm the legion's presence in Britain into the early 2nd century. Stone inscriptions name its officers, its builders, its authority. This is not rumor. It is physical record. Second, evidence beyond Britain. At Nijmegen, along the Rhine frontier, tiles, altars, and coin circulation suggest activity associated with the Ninth around AD 120. Not dramatic, not definitive, but real. Together, these points establish something critical. The Ninth Legion existed as a named unit after its disappearance from Britain, which means the story does not end at York. Now, what we don't know. There is no surviving account that describes the legion's final battle. No Roman historian records its destruction. No official decree announces its disbandment. And there is no agreement on when it ceased to function as a full legion. Some place the end shortly after AD 108. Others push it a decade later. A few argue it never ended at all, only changed form. This is where certainty fractures. And finally, what we infer. When later imperial documents list Rome's active legions, the Ninth is missing. Not merged, not renamed, not replaced in sequence, just gone. In Roman administration, absence is not accidental. Legions were Rome's most expensive assets. They were tracked, audited, reassigned. And yet, at some point after AD 120, the Ninth ceases to exist in the imperial system, which forces a question historians have argued over for centuries. Is absence of evidence proof that the Ninth was destroyed? Or does it simply reveal how much of Rome's record-keeping has been lost to time? Because history is not a complete archive. It is a survival of fragments. And sometimes, the silence tells us less about what happened, and more about what failed to survive. So we stand at a crossroads. The evidence confirms the Ninth lived. It confirms the Ninth moved. And it confirms the Ninth disappeared from Rome's future. But it does not tell us how or why. And that is where theories begin. When most people hear about the Ninth Legion, this is the story they already know. A Roman army marching north, deep into hostile territory. Surrounded by tribes Rome never fully controlled, and then destroyed. Northern Britannia was not a quiet frontier. It was cold, broken, unmapped beyond Roman roads. Here lived tribes Rome labeled barbari. Among them, the Caledonians, warriors who knew the land better than any legion ever could. Ambush was not a tactic here. It was survival. According to this theory, sometime after AD 108, the Ninth marched north and never returned. Cut off, overwhelmed, erased so completely that Rome could not even recover its standards. It is a powerful image, and it endured for a reason. In the 20th century, the idea entered popular imagination through fiction, most famously through novelist Rosemary Sutcliffe, who transformed the historical silence into a tragic narrative of loss and heroism. Her story did not invent the mystery, but it fixed it emotionally in Britain. Yet when we return to the evidence, the ground becomes less stable. No mass graves have been found. No weapons field confirms a legion-scale annihilation. No Roman historian records such a disaster, not even as a warning. And Rome did record defeats. Painful ones. Which raises an uncomfortable doubt. If the Ninth was destroyed here, why is the record silent? Still, the timing haunts historians. Only a few decades later, Rome constructs Hadrian's Wall, a massive stone barrier stretching across Britain. A declaration that expansion had ended. That Rome would now defend, instead of advance. Was the wall a response? A reaction to a catastrophe Rome preferred not to memorialize? Or was it simply the product of changing strategy, unrelated to the fate of a single legion? The northern catastrophe theory feels right. But feeling is not proof. And if the Ninth truly died here, why do traces of its name appear later, far from Britain? Because if even one fragment survived, then the story cannot end in the mist of northern Britannia. What if the Ninth did not vanish in Britain at all? What if it left, marching east, not north? Some historians propose that the legion was quietly redeployed out of Britain in the early 2nd century. No farewell inscription, no victory monument, just orders issued and a name that begins to fade. The eastern provinces were restless. Judea, in particular, was volatile, a place where revolts did not end cleanly, and victories often came at a political cost. Between 132 and 135 AD, Rome faced one of its most dangerous internal wars. A large-scale rebellion that forced the empire into brutal, prolonged fighting. Ancient sources describe staggering Roman losses. Entire units destroyed. Commanders killed. Legions pushed to the brink. Yet when historians attempt to list which legions fought there, something feels incomplete. Names appear, then disappear. The Ninth, so carefully documented in earlier decades, is suddenly absent from roles that should include it. No official record says it arrived. No official record says it was destroyed. Only silence. And silence, in Roman administration, is rarely accidental. Rome was meticulous with victories. Defeats were different. When losses were severe. When morale, reputation, or imperial authority were at stake. Records could be minimized, fragmented, or quietly retired. A legion destroyed in Britain would embarrass a governor. A legion destroyed in Judea, during one of the bloodiest revolts in Roman history, would challenge the image of imperial control itself. If the ninth was sent east, it may not have fallen in a single battle. It may have been ground down, fragmented, absorbed into other units. Its name allowed to die while its survivors lived on. Anonymous, which raises an unsettling possibility. Perhaps the ninth did not disappear because no one knew what happened. Perhaps it disappeared because too many people did. If the Ninth Legion was destroyed far from Rome, in a war Rome struggled to control, would the empire have preserved its memory or quietly erased it? Because if this theory is true, the question is no longer where the ninth disappeared, but why its disappearance was allowed to vanish with it. By now, we have 4 competing explanations, each one trying to solve the same problem. A Roman legion existed. It moved through history in clear footprints, and then the footprints stop. So at this point in the investigation, we do what Rome itself would do. We compare the accounts, we audit the evidence, and we mark what we know versus what we want to believe. Here are the 4 theories, side by side. Theory 1. The North. The ninth marches into northern Britain and is destroyed. An ambush, a campaign gone wrong, a disaster in the fog. It has emotional weight because it feels like an ending. But the evidence problem is brutal. No confirmed battlefield. No mass grave. No unmistakable debris field. If a legion vanished in one catastrophic event, something physical should remain. Theory 2. The continent. That the ninth is pulled out of Britain and sent toward the Rhine, or reassigned somewhere in Europe, caught in a conflict we can't cleanly reconstruct. This theory leans on something Rome did often, redeployment, but it suffers from the same disease as the others. Documentation that should be routine isn't there. Theory 3. The East. A transfer into the eastern provinces, possibly the Judean revolt, where Rome suffered enormous losses, where victory came with a cost that didn't look good carved in stone. This theory explains the silence better than most, because the East is where the empire's paperwork sometimes goes quiet on purpose. But it still requires a missing link, something that ties the ninth to that theater with certainty. And then there is the 4th theory, the one that changes how we read every other theory. Theory 4. Administrative erase. Not a heroic final battle. Not an epic last stand. Just removal. A legion broken up. Renamed. Absorbed. Its title retired like a ship's name after a wreck. So the empire can continue without carrying the scar in public. And that possibility is chilling because it doesn't demand a dramatic ending. It only demands something Rome was very good at: controlling the story. Now we need discipline, because this is where mystery stories often go wrong. When the most cinematic theory starts to feel like the most true. So for the rest of this documentary, we apply a hard filter. Not which ending do we like, but which explanation fits what we can actually support. North Britain catastrophe, medium plausibility or low confirmation. It fits the geography and the fear, but lacks physical closure. continent redeployment, medium plausibility or low to medium confirmation. It fits Roman logistics, but the trail goes thin too quickly. East Judea, major Eastern conflict, medium to high plausibility or low confirmation. It explains why silence, but still lacks a definitive signature. Administrative erase, rename, absorb, retire, high plausibility or medium confirmation. It matches Roman behavior patterns, and it doesn't require a single dramatic event. Notice what that does. It doesn't give us a single answer. It does something more valuable. It tells us which stories are evidence-led and which ones are mostly emotion-led. Because the true dividing line is not Britain versus Judea. It's this. Did the ninth disappear because something happened to it? Or because Rome chose what we would be allowed to remember? And that question sets up the next turn of the investigation. Because if we're going to test these theories properly, we need to stop thinking like storytellers and start thinking like administrators, people who tracked men, weapons, pay, supplies, inventories, the things a legion cannot exist without. So now we're here. Which theory fits what we know? And which is fantasy, wearing Roman armor? Because in the next segment, we follow the trail that doesn't care about legend. Not battles. Not rumors. The ledger. And if the ledger is missing, that may be the loudest clue of all. There's a kind of ending history rarely dramatizes, because it doesn't look like an ending at all. No battlefield. No trumpet calls. No last stand. Just paperwork. A practical possibility is this. The ninth was reorganized, broken apart, or disbanded. Not because it vanished, but because it stopped being useful in the form it once had. Rome was a machine built on administration. Legions were not myths to the empire. They were line items. Men counted. Weapons logged. Pay allocated. Supplies moved along roads like blood through arteries. And when something went wrong, not a single defeat, but a slow collapse of effectiveness, Rome didn't always announce it with a dramatic epitaph. Sometimes it simply restructured. A legion could be reduced after years of attrition. Its survivors redistributed. Its veterans settled. Its title quietly retired. The way a modern institution closes a department and reassigns staff. So the system keeps functioning without admitting failure. And here's the unnerving part. That kind of disappearance can happen without leaving the kind of evidence we keep looking for. No mass grave, because there was no single event. No battlefield, because there was no final battle. No heroic last moment, because the ending was administrative. Just a name that stops appearing in the official rhythm of the empire. But that doesn't make it less mysterious. It makes it more unsettling. Because it suggests the ninth did not die in a moment. It dissolved. And if a legion can dissolve without a headline, then what else in Roman history has dissolved the same way? And we simply never noticed. So we have to ask a question that sounds almost ridiculous. Until you remember who the Romans were. Can a bureaucratic purge be just as mysterious as a battlefield annihilation? If the ninth disappeared this way, we may never find its last stand. because the ending wasn't a scene. It was a decision. Now we come to the theory that attacks the foundation of the mystery itself. What if the ninth didn't disappear? And the problem is that we've been reading the evidence wrong. Because much of what we know about Roman legions comes from fragments, inscriptions chipped by time, copies made centuries later, texts transmitted by human hands, hands that misread, miscopied, or simplified. Some researchers argue that references to Legio IX Hispana may be confused with other units, or that later scribes, working from damaged originals, introduced errors that hardened into facts. In other words, the ninth might not be missing. The record might be messy. Consider how easily this happens. A stone inscription breaks right where the numeral should be. A copyist fills the gap with what seems obvious. A historian repeats it. Another historian cites it. And suddenly, a reconstruction becomes a certainty. Even the idea of numbered identity can mislead us. Rome's military system was not static. Names, titles, honors, these evolved. Units were merged, detached, reformed. A legion could retain veterans but lose its title, or retain its title but become a different organism entirely. So the question shifts again. What if the ninth survived? But not as the ninth. What if it lived on inside another formation? Its men absorbed, its eagle transferred, its number retired, until the identity we're chasing became untraceable. And that possibility is dangerous because it means we may be hunting a ghost that is made of paperwork and assumptions, not bones and steel. If we can't trust the labels, then we can't trust the story we built from them. So here, the unsettling thought. Did the ninth vanish? Or did it survive and simply lose its identity inside Rome's machinery? Because if that's true, then the mystery isn't where the legion died. It's whether we can even recognize it. If it didn't die at all. Up to this point, every theory has focused on people. Where they marched, where they fought, where they might have died. But Roman legions were not just men. They were systems, and systems leave traces. If the ninth vanished in battle, there should be weapons abandoned in quantity. If it was transferred, there should be supply movements that spike and then fade. If it was dissolved administratively, there should be redistribution. Arms reassigned, pay rerouted, equipment absorbed. A legion could disappear from memory, but it could not disappear from logistics. A full-strength legion required thousands of standardized items. Shields built to pattern, armor sized and issued, swords forged in batches, wagons, animals, tents, tools, grain shipments scheduled with ruthless regularity. Rome tracked these things obsessively, not for glory, but because losing control of them meant losing control of the army. So we ask a colder question. Where is the ninth's material footprint? Because here's what makes this unsettling. When other legions were destroyed, we can often trace the aftershock. Emergency re-equipment orders, sudden levies, unusual concentrations of weapons far from workshops, accelerated production in frontier armories. But with the ninth, the paper trail doesn't scream. It barely whispers. There is no clear surge of replacement gear that matches the loss of an entire legion. No sudden, well-documented redistribution of thousands of weapons tied to a single event. No administrative shockwave that says something catastrophic just happened. Instead, what we see is continuity. Roads continue to move supplies. Workshops continue to function. Frontiers adjust, but not in panic. And that matters, because a violent annihilation should distort the system. This doesn't, which pushes us toward an uncomfortable conclusion. If the ninth disappeared, it likely did so in a way that did not require Rome to suddenly replace everything it lost. That rules out certain fantasies. A total ambush with all equipment destroyed. Unlikely. A single disastrous battle with no logistical aftermath. Also unlikely. But a slow absorption. A gradual redistribution. A controlled dismantling. That fits the evidence uncomfortably well. Imagine it happening not in one season, but across years. Cohorts reduced. Equipment reassigned. Veterans settled locally. New recruits sent elsewhere. No single ledger entry reads, Legio IX ends here. Instead, dozens of small, boring entries quietly erase it. And here's the detail most people miss. Rome did not need to explain this. Because Rome did not write history for us. It wrote it for itself. If a legion became inefficient, politically inconvenient, or symbolically compromised, the cleanest solution was not a monument, but silence. So now the mystery tightens. Because if the ninth left no battlefield and no logistical scar, then its disappearance was not chaotic. It was controlled. Legends thrive on violence. Administrations thrive on continuity. And the continuity we see here suggests something deeply unsettling. The ninth was not lost in chaos. It was managed out of existence. So we return to the beginning. Not to the fog. Not to the battlefield that never was. But to a system so efficient that it could erase thousands of men without ever admitting they were gone. And that leaves us with the final haunting problem. Not what happened to the ninth, but whether Rome ever wanted us to know. We return to where we began. Not to a battlefield, not to a final stand, but to absence. Somewhere in the Roman world, a legion stopped being mentioned. Not erased in anger. Not immortalized in defeat. Just no longer recorded. We followed every path that should have led to an ending. The northern frontier, where ambushes leave scars. The continent, where movements are logged. The east, where wars rewrite reputations. The administration, where decisions are made quietly. The arsenal, where objects outlast men. And each path gave us something. But none gave us closure. Because closure is not how empires operate. Rome did not owe explanations. It owed results. If a legion failed slowly, it could be reduced. If it embarrassed the system, it could be renamed. If it complicated the story of control, it could be absorbed and forgotten. History remembers victories. Systems remember efficiency. And what remains of the Ninth Legion suggests not chaos, but control, which leaves us with a final, uncomfortable truth. The disappearance of the Ninth may not be a mystery Rome failed to solve. It may be a mystery Rome solved perfectly, by making sure there was nothing left to find. The roads still run north. The deserts still hold ruins. The ledgers still balance. And somewhere beneath that order, a legion exists only as a question. Not where it fell, but why its ending was never meant to be read aloud. If you believe the ninth was destroyed in battle, tell us where and why the evidence never surfaced. If you believe it was erased by bureaucracy, ask yourself how many other stories ended the same way. And if you think the truth is still buried, then the story isn't finished yet. Subscribe for more evidence-led investigations into history's quiet mysteries. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who listens closely. And in the comments, tell us, what do you think happened to the Ninth Legion?